today this will be a fun talk around, this kind of we've talked about next level Agile. We've talked about, there's things out there, a lot of people are talking about business agility. We're kind of using a term, organizational agility, that's similar, but means something a little bit different to us. And we want to talk about what happens when we take this all the way to the whole org versus just within technology or within just a team. So I'm David Hawks, certified Scrum trainer, certified enterprise coach, and most of my time is spent partnering with organizations, helping them as they are going through an Agile transformation. So much of my experience is really at the senior leadership level, helping kind of leaders navigate this kind of change that's happening. And we're starting to see more and more Agile happening outside of the technology organization, which is really exciting for us, and really cool that this impact is being made in more and more of the organization. So here's a starting premise. The thing is, what has gotten us here today will not get us where we're going. So many of us have been very successful as leaders, and so what we have done is, we've had success in various ways where we, and that's gotten us to the leadership level that we are today. And that's great, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the leadership style that's worked over the last 10 to 15 years is what's going to help us in the next 5 years. We see a bunch of companies here that were successful at some point and probably were at the top or the pinnacle in their market segment. And probably were just like, let's just keep doing what we've been always doing. And maybe that didn't work out so well for them. The rate at which Fortune 500 companies are going out of business is exponentially increasing. That's not a good thing, right? So how can we as leaders make sure that our organizations don't have the same kind of perilous fate? So let's think about the dynamics of what's happening in the world that we work in. So what's changed over the last 10 to 15 years? I mean, Agile was first coined in 2001. So in the last 17 years, we've had a ton of change. And a lot of people talk about the rate of change is exponentially increasing. I think about it as really what's happening is the rate of disruption in our market, the disruption from competition is just exponentially increasing. And so that's making it where we have to respond quicker and quicker because of things like the technology dynamics that are in play, because of things like the cloud. I can remember when I first started my first product myself, and I had to, this was 15 years ago, I had to go buy servers, I had to buy rack space, I had to do all these, physical stuff and buy Oracle licenses. And so my barrier to entry to create a new product was, tens of thousands of dollars. And to build that product was, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, today, we can rent, cloud storage on AWS and, for cents a minute and not have to have all of this upfront cost, which allows anybody to build a new app, for anybody to build a new product, to build a new service that could disrupt some part of your product domain. And more, you see this kind of shadow IT or, other parts of the organization that just buy a product for 99 cents a month that is disrupting something that you're trying to do within your technology organization. The other thing is just, we have international competition. Anybody in the world could come up with this new product, could deliver this new thing. And so the choices that buyers have today, they have so many different options besides just you. Even if you're serving an internal customer, they have other options, which is to buy a SaaS cloud product and displace even what you're providing them internally. So we're getting much more disruption because the reality is we live in what we call this VUCA world, right? This volatile world where the speed of change, the dynamics of change, the magnitude of change is just getting bigger and bigger, and that's making it really hard as senior leaders to plan, right? How do we plan? It used to be the main thing would create a 3 to 5 year strategic plan and try and execute on it. Well, in a volatile world, there's not as near as much value in creating that plan. So we might want to create visions, we might want to forecast things, but it's less about us creating an exact plan and managing to it or executing to it. So it used to be that as leaders, we try and create a management style where we're more execution focused. And what we're going to see throughout this talk is, well, maybe that's not really what's going to get us, there to the next level. We also have a lot of uncertainty, right? It's very foggy. It's very unclear. Like, how do we know what the future holds? How do we, we're unclear about even some of the things that we're seeing now, and how is that going to impact the future, or something happened, the cause and effect, like what really is causing the symptom that we're seeing, because we live in a complex world where there's multiple interdependencies. We've got highly complex problems and market dynamics that are in play. So it's really hard for us to dissect these problems and really figure out what's going on across, especially as we get into large enterprises across organizations. How do all the different parts interplay is really, really tough. And then, we just don't have a lot of clarity around that. So that's what, the VUCA world is, this, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world that we live in. So we're dealing with all of those market dynamics, and that's why we can't just manage the way that we always have, is because all of these things that are, getting into play are becoming harder and harder for one person to manage, for us to have everything just kind of funnel up to the top, make decisions, and manage that back down. That's too slow of a process. Now, the other thing I want to explore is kind of what has been this evolution of Agile, right? And we would say Agile is now ready for the whole organization. That's what, this talk is about, whole organizational agility. So we started out, 15, 20 years ago, and really most of what we were talking about with Agile is how do we get one team doing Agile? So we got this one team, and we've got a product owner and a scrum master, and the team is starting to work and doing daily scrums and having retros. And then we started figuring out, okay, this is good. If it's good for a team, let's figure out how do we apply this across, an organization and a technology organization. So typically, many of the calls that we get for people that want help, and they call us up, usually that's starting in the technology organization. That's the mainstream, of the market that we serve. And so that's great. We're doing stuff within the technology organization, but all of a sudden what happens is we start hitting the next ceiling, which is, okay, we've got our technology leaders on board, but you know what? We need help from the business, right? Because the technology organization doesn't serve itself, right? It serves the business side of the house. And so we start saying, you know what, business, we need you guys to play this game with us. And so we start saying, hey, can you provide, maybe product owner, or, can you engage and come to sprint reviews? And so we start getting business involvement. We're like, okay, great. This is awesome. We're starting to get, now we're Agile, right? We got the technology organization, we got the business involved. We're working on the right stuff. All that stuff is good. And then we start realizing, you know what? In order to really be Agile, well, we need everybody else in the company on board and supporting what we're doing, right? So we need the executives to support how we're working from an Agile way. We need marketing to connect and support, and HR and finance, all these other elements to start interfacing with us inside this technology organization and supporting. And so that's great. Right now we're starting to get where, we're starting to break down some of these other barriers. But then all of a sudden, the next level that we saw is, well, what could we apply Agile into some of these other groups? So could we do, this is what I call business unit agility. So we start seeing where the marketing organization says, well, we can do Agile HR or Agile marketing, or HR says that we can do Agile HR. And so this is where within marketing, they maybe start managing their work in a more Agile way. They start prioritizing in a more Agile way. They start creating clear priorities, and maybe have a Kanban board. But they also start thinking about how can we work in a more incremental and iterative way. And HR is starting to do a similar thing for the work that they're doing, or maybe a business unit that starts doing things there. And so all of a sudden, okay, now we've got like pockets of Agile that are happening throughout the organization. And then the next level is where we say, well, why isn't the whole organization operating in an Agile way? Why, the way that we are all making decisions and prioritizing our work, the way that we are planning projects and initiatives, how could we do those in a more incremental way? And so when we talk about whole organizational agility, we're not talking about just the tech organization with the whole org as a part of it. We're talking about the whole organization and how all of the leaders are operating and working together. And that's what we're going to be kind of dissecting. What does that mean? What are the elements of whole organizational agility? And how do we're going to go through 7 different things that it takes to actually implement whole organizational agility. That's what we're going to be walking through today. So what really is, let's distill down what Agile really is. And some people, their go-to for what Agile really is would say, well, the manifesto. Right here, we've got an example of, off of the website, the Agile manifesto, or somebody might say it's Scrum. But I don't think that's really what Agile is, right? If we really distill down and I look at what Agile really is, these are some of the elements that I see that Agile really is. So the first thing is, we have radical transparency. We talk a lot when we're working with Agile teams and organizations about, all right, we need to make all the work visible. Why do we want to make all the work visible? Is so that we have transparency, we can see what's happening. And transparency is bidirectional, right? It's that we're trying to get visibility of what's happening down at a team level, up through the organization and across the organization, but it's also that our visions and our strategy and the things that we're doing at the highest levels are being communicated and clear all the way down to the lowest levels. Because what we're trying to do is take this and have trust across the organization, but also if we're allowing everybody to make informed business decisions, right? The teams are making informed decisions based on the strategy is informed based on what's happening at a team level. That's really critical for the second element, which is having high-performing, empowered, cross-functional teams, right? The biggest concept around Agile is building these teams that are self-organizing, that understand their goals, but they own how. How do we get it done? And the reason why this is such the critical dynamic in this whole organizational agility world is that remember VUCA, we said it's too slow for us to be able to take and some input of information come in the organization, go up to the highest levels, and come back down to somebody to then make a decision and come back down. That takes too long to be able to respond to the market dynamics that are in play. So what we're wanting is cross-functional teams that are closest to the problem, and we're distributing control down to the team and allowing these teams that now have everybody required in order to make a decision, and they are empowered to be able to get to make those decisions and to move fast and respond fast based on the part of the market or the product or whatever that they serve. So that's a really critical dynamic. The third item here is that they are outcome driven, that we're focused on results. We're focused on achieving value, that we're very value driven. And a term we use a lot is outcome over output. Right? Many organizations, remember early, I said, are really just focused on executing towards a 5-year strategy or a 5-year, 3-year plan. And what we're saying is that you made a decision and you're executing towards a plan that was decided in the past that's actually probably defunct. It's no longer valid. And so what we really need to be doing is giving clear goals or objectives and outcomes down to those teams and allowing the teams to iterate towards achieving the outcome. So that we're focused on purpose and we're focused on discovery, we're focused on iterating and incremental delivery towards an outcome, right? So we got these high performing teams, we've got transparency throughout the organization. We're focused on these results and these objectives that we're trying to achieve, not hitting a plan or just implementing a set of requirements or delivering a project. We're focused on delivering outcomes, and it's really critical that we break things down into small parts. We talk about like limiting work in process a lot in Agile, getting done, minimal viable product. But how do we build enough to actually put something into the market and get feedback on it and iterate from there, right? And so how do we iterate and learn? And so this is the last element. The fifth element of Agile is this learning culture. And we talk a lot about shortening the feedback loop. How do we validate or invalidate our ideas as fast as possible? How do we do that early and often? So these 5 things are really what I see as the key elements when we talk about just distill down Agile. Get rid of the frameworks, get rid of Scrum and SAFe and Kanban and even the manifesto, and just say, okay, at the end of the day, what's at the core of what we're really describing when we say something is Agile? And I really think these 5 elements are what's really core from an agility perspective, right? Now, how do we actually implement this, right? Like, so, oh, that sounds great. That sounds easy, Dave. Like, we'll go do that. But it's hard, right? It's hard to actually not only, it's one thing to do these things at a single team, right? That's actually gotten fairly routine, like for us and for Agile coaches, that, hey, we can go in and help a team to be fairly Agile. But how do we apply this across an organization, and not just the technology organization, but across the whole organization? So I've got 7 elements of things that I feel like are critical from an implementation perspective. So the first one is that our leadership dynamics have to change. How we lead, and I started with this premise. What we've done to get us to here is not what's going to get us there, and our management style is not going to get us there. So management 1.0 started about 100 years ago, right? There was no concept of management, and the idea was, all right, command and control can help us standardize. It can help us be more consistent. It can help us get higher utilization rates. And it allowed us to scale things like a factory where we're cranking out widgets and cranking out more and more widgets, right? Cranking out cars, so economies of scale and utilization are all things that are really important in management 1.0. About 50 years ago, we met this guy named Edward Stimming, and he started introducing us to, okay, that's great, but we can do it better. And so the concepts around lean started to come into play, and which are really focused on how do we eliminate waste and make things more efficient? How can we reduce the volatility in the factory floor? And how can we start empowering people closer to the factory line to improve that process, but still was very focused on efficiency and delivery, and still more execution focused, and quality was a key part of that as well. And I really feel like management 3.0 is Agile, right? Agile leadership. So management 3.0 is still building on these concepts that we've all taken from management 1.0 and 2.0, but now it's much more about how do we empower the worker, the team? How do we have more servant leadership? How do we how do we be at the bottom of the org chart, as serving the team, as opposed to up top and being the person in charge, right? Where is the control? Where is the power? Needs to be to the people that are closest to the problem. And so this is now a big leadership step for folks to go through. And now we've got to start working on leadership development here, because many of the managers in place today are still managing in a 2.0 or even a 1.0 way. We also think about culture maturity. And so, this book, Reinventing Organizations, and this model, I think it was Peter Green that put this picture together, has from the book, is showing all right, as organizations mature, right, we start to see, and you can see some of the same types of things, like down in a yellow organization, you see hierarchy and stability and control. So you see some of that management at 1.0 type of stuff. And as organizations mature and you get into the green and the teal levels, you start seeing things that are a little bit more around, like at green, delighting customers, shared values, culture over strategy, empowerment, engagement. And so Agile starts to apply much more at these higher levels. And so this is where we got to look at our organization and our current culture. Does it align in a way that is supportive of these new market dynamics? And many organizations are stuck in kind of the orange and yellow area and haven't necessarily matured into these next level areas. So this becomes a really critical dynamic as well. Now, a third dynamic is what I call throttle demand to match throughput. So every organization has thinks they have a throughput problem, but the reality is they have a problem of leaders making priority decisions, right? And what I mean by that is every company has a constraint, which is how much stuff can we get done. But what we tend to do is we maybe prioritize stuff when we should be sequencing things. So we prioritize and we say, okay, well, here's everything we need to do, and we plan, and then we push it into a plan, and we say, here's everything that we got to get done this year, regardless of really what the throughput is. And so we talk a lot about in Agile about switching from pull versus push. But I think many companies get this wrong. They think the bottleneck is funding. The bottleneck, they think, is if we just get the budget approved, then we can get this project or this initiative done. But the actual bottleneck is having a high-performing team that can do the work. And just because we get funding doesn't mean all of a sudden we have a high-performing team that can get a lot of work done. So really what we need to do is look at what's our throughput in terms of the teams that we have in place and how much can they get done, and then sequence the demand, all the ideas that we have, and say, okay, which ones are we going to do first, right, before we do the next ones, and how many can we really do at one time. And we have this saying, like, stop starting, start finishing. Like, how can we actually start finishing and getting to value quicker and learning faster, which ties into number 4, which is about how can we prioritizing learning over execution. So anybody that's seen one of my talks before has probably seen me draw this green line, red line story that says in the red scenario, that's us executing a plan towards a target that we're defining at the beginning, which is our dumbest point. And so what we want to do in Agile is the green line, which is we want to iterate, and we're not iterating towards the red target because, again, the red target was defined at our dumbest point. We want to iterate towards and find the target that will actually maximize value. And the way that we do that is, again, working iterative and incrementally and getting feedback from our stakeholders, from the market, and trying to accelerate the learning cycles. And so again, the key dynamic here is most organizations are execution focused. They're optimizing for execution. They're optimizing for output. They're optimizing for let's just get more stuff done. And the reality is we're working on the wrong stuff. Like most studies show that more than half of the stuff we work on is not valuable at the end of the day. Our customers don't see it as value. So what we need to do is focus more on learning and discovery and optimizing and finding out what are the things that we should be working on and not working on by working on them in small pieces and iterating towards the thing that will maximize the value. The 5th item is we talk about cross-functional teams in the technology space, and usually that means things like the developers and testers or front end and back end folks all on a team. But really, when we think about the full value stream in an organization, technology is just one part of it. So here's what happens in many organizations is we make a request, and then it goes to the purple team, and the purple team throws something over to the red team, and the red team may return it back to the purple team before they send it over to the green team, and then the green team works on it, and they may send it back to the red team. That might go back to the purple team, to the green team, to the red team, to the brown team. Eventually, like, we deliver value, which means we're not getting stuff out the door very fast, which means our learning cycle is really long, which means in a lot of times what we do is a big, long project that's 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 2 years. We plan it all out. Everybody goes and does their work. We deliver the value. It's a huge bet, right? And what we're doing in many organizations is making really big bets. And when we lose a big bet, it's painful. And in Agile, what we're saying is we want to make really small bets, right? We want to make small bets, and we want to make those bets quicker, right? We want to make small, quick bets and then learn from those, and that'll help us iterate. And so the structure of our organization really impacts this. If this is 4 different departments with 4 different VPs in your organization, then there's politics involved. There's all sorts of things that are in the way for us to actually deliver value to our customer. So what we talk about is we need to break down these silos to form cross-functional teams. We want teams, even if these are virtual teams, the reporting structure, that's a whole nother, argument. But at minimum, we want to create a dynamic that is saying, all right, somebody on the purple team is going to be talking with the red and the green and the brown, and they're all going to be together, and they're all going to work together to solve this problem for the customer. And these should be long-standing teams. It shouldn't be like we just put a tiger team together and then they dissolve, because all the team dynamics that we're going to learn to be a high-performing team, we want them to be able to crank through stuff. So what we really want to do is just have this cross-functional team. We take a request and we deliver it to this cross-functional team, and they deliver value really quickly, and they do it in small cycles, these small, quick cycles of learning, and they're very tightly coupled with the customer, not tightly coupled with their silo, right? So that's what we really want to focus on, is breaking down those silos and creating those cross-functional teams. So number 6. So this starts impacting our funding models, right? Like budgeting. And so this is where finance starts to come in, and we can't get very far without finance also engaging in this challenge with us. And so if we take things in a traditional approach, we say, all right, we're going to define a budget. We're going to manage to a budget. What do we do with budgets? We always spend them. We spend the budget, right? So what we want to do is, instead of saying, all right, we're just going to go spend the budget, is we want to say, well, we might forecast that this is how much we're going to spend over a certain amount of time, and here's the business case and why we might do it. But let's approach this in much more of an investment model, right? It is the CFO stands for finance, right? Right. So if I'm investing in something, then I'm typically going to say, all right, I'm going to put some money into it, but then I want to see how things are going before I put more money into it. So the idea would be, if I've got this cross-functional team, they're working on an initiative, we might say, yeah, we know we're probably going to be spending $1 million this year, but here's $100,000, and every month you got to come back to some review board or some team, and you got to say, hey, here's what we're learning, here's what we figured out, and they're making a recommendation on, should we keep investing in them? Should we spend more money? Should we spend less money? Should we abandon the initiative, right? And if the teams that are closest to the problem are the ones that are now empowered to be able to kind of guide those decisions, then that starts changing the dynamic, as opposed to me just saying, hey, here's $1 million, see you in a year. Right? We're going to get a much different result, a much different outcome. There's a different level of accountability. Here's where even things like OKRs, objectives and key results, can help us in terms of how we're even planning and managing to these objectives. So shorter term kind of objectives and shorter term review cycles is really what we're trying to do here. Now, the 7th item is, all of this is change, and all of this is hard, and all of this is affecting leaders. It's affecting culture. It's not just like we're gonna change. We're gonna teach everybody a new process for 2 days, and then everything works. This is organizational. This requires organizational change management. What we see here is the transformation model, the organizational change model that Agile Velocity uses. And it borrows things from Satir and Cotter. And what we have to do is be methodical about managing and facilitating the change initiative that gets into things like, how are we communicating the change? How are we managing the change? How are we creating safety for folks who are going through role changes and responsibility changes? How are we enabling these leaders? And again, this isn't just something people can get trained one day and they change their leadership dynamic. How are they going to get coached through this process? So we have to be very methodical about how we're going to manage folks through the stages of kind of maturity along this journey. So in review, what we really see is that if we do organizational agility and we implement these kind of 7 things, we manage through those 7 things, like what is that? How does that help us? How does that help us as an organization? And so some of the key dynamics here is the first, it creates focus, right? Instead of us just trying to work on a bunch of stuff, you know, Henrik says in his video, like, you're just trying to shove more paper in the printer to get it to go faster. That's what most organizations are trying to do, is just shove more paper in the printer, you know, or shove more priorities on everybody's plate. What we really need to do is do less at one time so that we can actually get more value delivered by the end of the quarter, by the end of the year. So we want to create focus by working in this way. It'll create a more engaged workforce, which will help us with retention, will help us with productivity, and just you know, fulfillment, which is going to start allowing us to, as an organization, have a higher ability to adapt to what the market is dictating, what our competition is dictating, what our customers are demanding. So our speed to adapt will increase. And then because we have more engaged workforce, people closest to the problem making decisions, because we're adapting faster based on what the market's saying, because we're focused, that's going to allow us to build much more innovative products, right? That's going to allow us to be the disruptor as opposed to being the disrupted. And that's going to ultimately lead to more engaged, happier customers, promoters, and serving our market in a much better way. So I know I was talking really fast. I see some questions that are coming in. And so that's the core of our talk. I might flip back into some of those. Actually, let me go ahead and stay on this slide as we kind of hit some questions.
Yeah, so first question is, how do Agile teams effectively communicate performance for execs and HR who expect traditional KPIs during a transition to meet quarterly performance reviews and CEO curiosity?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a loaded question. Thank you, whoever asked that. So yeah, there's a couple dynamics in play there. One is you kind of have in your description the tech org that's trying to be agile, and the rest of the org isn't, right? Which is part of the dynamic that I'm saying is flawed in many organizations right now, is that you get like an agile bubble inside of a waterfall container, and you still have the rest of the organization making decisions in a very traditional way, asking for KPIs in a very traditional way, and there needs to be like this translation layer. So one part of the answer is, what do you do in the interim? But the long-term answer is, we got to change that dynamic, right? In order for the organization to truly be successful, we want to start working towards chipping away at, hey, having these 3-year goals and managing in a traditional KPI way, or managing towards output, is not the best answer. So the right answer is, we want to manage towards objectives. We want to manage towards outcomes. And so the measures shouldn't be like, well, what's your velocity, or how many points you're getting done, or how many lines of code are you getting done. Those are all output measures. Well, or even cycle time is an output measure. What we really want to manage towards is, well, what outcome are we trying to achieve? You know, in terms of, hey, our product is trying to move the needle on this objective with this customer segment. We're trying to get 20% more retention of our frequent flyer market. You know, then that becomes an objective. And so tying into the OKR process, right, that would, you know, here's our goal, and how are we going to measure our results? You know, like, all right, frequent flyers are rebooking within 90 days. That's what we should be talking about. and that's something that now translates between both levels, where management is on board. Yeah, if you achieve that, great. I don't care how many points or whatever else you get done, but if you achieve this objective, and same thing, the team is really clear on what their purpose is and what their output should be. Actually, let me just say, they're not necessarily clear on what their output should be. They're clear on their objective, their outcome should be, and they've got to iterate towards figuring out what are all the things that we might need to build in order to achieve that. Maybe we achieve it within 2 weeks. Maybe it would take 2 years. And maybe we've got to iterate towards figuring that out.
Cool. So next question is in reference to the cross-functional teams. So are you including DevOps, tech writing, or other auxiliary functions with those teams?
Yeah, so let me go back to this kind of slide. So I think there's 2 ways of thinking about it. In the way that the question's asked, that's still kind of thinking about it within tech, right? So all the things you just listed are other parts of the technology organization. And so yes, we still would want DevOps and tech writing and everybody that we need involved. Now there are different ways of solving that, right? So there's kind of a DevOps strategy of saying, well, maybe DevOps team's goal is to enable the team to be able to self-deploy, not that the team would need somebody from the DevOps team on their team for every deployment, right? So how do we, sometimes we do have shared services teams that might be outside of the cross-functional team that's creating the infrastructure that's going to allow this team to be successful. That's still a tech-centered kind of focus, and part of what I was trying to convey here is to say that's just one part of the value stream, which is delivering the software product. And if you're a software product organization, then maybe that's most of your value stream. Do we also have the business? But what about the marketing, for that product? All the other elements that are needed from a go-to-market strategy perspective. Do we have everybody talking? And this slide isn't saying all those people need to be on the same team every day, co-located in the same way that we maybe do an Agile team. But what we don't want to have is, if I added to this hierarchy, we don't want, if the purple team needs something from the red team, the purple team has to make a request from their VP that goes over to the other VP that comes down to the red team, right? And we see that happen a lot up through the hierarchy and back down. So this is just saying, even if we had cross-functional teams within Agile, we also want to have something larger that is the cross-functional team to get value out the door. That's the software part, the tech part, plus the rest.
Awesome. So last question we have here is, I think this is in reference to the final slide, asking how do you measure happiness? I think that's referencing that.
Yeah. I don't know that there's a magic answer. There's definitely folks that are doing Net Promoter Score, and then there's a camp that's debunked Net Promoter Score. It's a data point. You also can measure customer, it's is happiness really the right thing? Do I care if I have all 20 of my users are happy, but I only have 20 users and I don't have 20,000? So really it goes back to kind of that OKR type of mentality of what's really our objective and how are we going to measure that we're actually serving our customers? Is it that they're happy, or is it that they're engaged and they are promoting our product, that they're tweeting out about it? If I'm a startup, hey, I was using Runkeeper, and you can take pictures, and they're probably measuring how many people are tagging Runkeeper in their, whatever, right? So there's all sorts of different ways that you got to think about for your product. What's really important? Is it that we have promoters because we're trying to grow and we're trying to attract more people? Is it that we're trying to retain and we're not losing folks? So as long as we're retaining our current business, then that means that they're happy. There's all sorts of dynamics that could go into play there. They're not calling the support desk every 5 minutes and being pissed off. That could be a happiness measure. There's all sorts of things there.
right. So it looks like we still have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead and hit you with a question of my own. And that is, this sounds easy.
Yeah.
Why aren't more businesses doing it? What makes it hard?
So I think, yeah, there's definitely parts that are fairly seem easy on paper. The cultural change is hard. I think the biggest dynamic is the first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem. And I'm not sure many of the executive level are admitting they have a problem, right? You know, they may say, that team down there, they have a problem. And so there's a lack of awareness, I think, at certain levels that they're, you know, it's do we really need to change on how we work? I think there's awareness that there is a different way, or a lack of awareness that there is a different way. There's a misconception that Agile is just a tech thing, and I think it's because of, you know, a lot of our stories, and yes, Agile has come out of tech, but I think there's a stigma there that like Agile that's what we do in tech. But more and more, I mean, I think 3 times this last year, Harvard Business Review had an Agile article on its cover. And so, you know, one of them was the cover, but other articles that were still cited like on the cover. And so more and more, we're starting to see Agile being used in this whole organizational agility kind of model, but it's new, right? Agile in tech is mainstream. I don't know, there's no tech organization I'm talking to anymore that's like, yeah, we don't do Agile. Like everybody's doing Agile in some way. Nobody's like running around going, man, we're hanging on a waterfall. You know, they may be doing Agile and still being very waterfall, but there's the whole organizational agility is still very early stage. And so I think there's an awareness, and then there's just a matter of, in order to make this change, it is going to affect organizational structure. It is affecting people's turf. It is affecting people's identity as leaders, and the ones that resist it the most are the middle management. Actually, you know, the teams are usually pretty like happy to work in a better way. Senior leaders actually, once you start talking, like they want these outcomes, but the middle management in large organizations is really where more of the politics and more of the turf war kind of happens. And I think the thing we have to do is create a path of safety of, hey, your job's not going to get eliminated, but your job, the structure and the responsibilities of you as a leader may change, but hopefully in a more strategic way, which is a much better thing for me as a career path perspective. And I don't think we've created that safety for folks.
We have a follow-up question to that, asking what approach would you take to start getting an organization to align in this manner, e.g. inception to functional?
Yeah, so what we would do first is, you know, when we talk about managing the change, the first stage there, we talk about align. So the first thing we want to do is align around a purpose for a change, right? If there's no strong desire or drive or pain, then it's going to be too much work to go through. If we're just like, yeah, we'd like to be a little bit better, like you're not gonna make it. But if there's got to be something that you're able, in the align stage, we talk a lot about why. So why change? What's the business imperative of why we should change? And it can't be like to be more agile. It can't be because we want organizational agility. It's got to be like, we need to be able to adapt faster to the market demands, or else we're going to be out of business, right? Like, what business imperative can we create that would rally everybody in the organization that this is something really important to do? So that's number one. Number two is we've got to build a guiding coalition. We call it a lot of times an agile leadership team that is cross-functional from a senior leadership perspective representation, that isn't just about the tech org, but it is got parts from HR and finance and marketing and executives and tech and the business, and saying, okay, how are we going to facilitate this change and remove and manage through the organizational impediments that will emerge as we start going through this and start implementing, like Cotter's change model of how are we going to actually communicate this vision and start implementing these changes. So starting with the why, starting with, you know, the change roadmap, if you will, and then we use Agile to manage the change initiative. So we, you know, build a backlog, we define measures of success, and we start prioritizing, and we start working in like, if it's Kanban or if it's, you know, 2-week sprints, we start managing through the change using this model.
Awesome. Another question is, for managers who love their control, what is the most persuasive point you would give to sway them towards servant leadership?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say on that is most managers were promoted because they did good work and never have been taught how to be a leader. Most managers have never gone to any management training. So why do they clamp onto their control? Because that's the only thing they know, right? That's the only thing. That's what they've been rewarded for their whole career, has been just getting stuff done. As an individual contributor, that's what you got rewarded for. How much stuff did you get done? So now they're a frontline manager, and they're still rewarded for getting stuff done. And even sometimes they're directors of managers, and they're still rewarded for getting stuff done. So you know, the first thing we got to look at, or we would look at, is, okay, what is the cultural dynamic of reward system within the organization? And it could be that this manager is acting the frontline manager is acting this way because 2 levels up is still that way. And you know, we can't start with the frontline manager, because the root of the problem is actually how the VP of that organization is managing. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that, like, changing others, you got to start with their why. Like, what motivates them? Why? We got to meet them where they are. Why are they managing the way they are? But I would go to that person and try and figure out what keeps that person up at night. What is the pain that person's having? What would motivate? What's something I could find that would motivate them to want to work differently? And a lot of times it's like, I want to be more strategic, but I just don't know how, right? And they're still too stuck in what they know, and they're just kind of still in that expert leader mode, and they haven't, figured out, like, hey, there are other ways of leading, and what are the tools? They've just never been taught those tools. They've never been shown that path. So there's a number of dynamics there that are kind of in play, that you'd have to kind of work through.
All right, final question. Anonymous asks, I came from an outsourcing company. How do you imagine these cross-functional teams if our tech teams work for external clients?
Yeah, so that gets hard. When I think the root of the problem actually starts with in your vendor client situation. It's got to start with the client side, right? So I've seen outsourcing done well, and I've seen it been disastrous. And where it's done well is where the people on the vendor side are not treated any differently, right? They're treated as a part of the company, a part of the team, and depending on how that's structured, is it, they're one of the members of the team, or they're providing a whole team. But if we start treating the vendor as like a second-class citizen in the organization, that's the root of the dysfunction right there. And we're probably never going to get over that, because the structure of even their statement of work, their contract, is one that's saying, like, neither of us want any risk, and we're trying to put the risk on each other and all those kinds of things. And so that's already creating a unhealthy kind of dynamic, as opposed to a partnering, we're all in it together type of dynamic. And so I could just look at somebody's contract and probably within about 60 seconds tell you if this is going to work in an agile way or not an agile way, based on the dynamics that are in play there. So yeah, there's not a lot that the vendor side can necessarily do unless the client side is willing to kind of work in a different way there. I mean, you can still do better things with Agile, but you're going to hit a ceiling, is I guess what I should say. You're going to be limited.
All right, looks like we've reached the end of all of our questions. Thanks again for joining us during your lunch hour, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.